Hey guys, it's Craig. It is 11:30 on Tuesday, May 2nd. So rather than go live, I thought I would do this. I'm down here in my studio, and I just got done a Zoom conference call with our team that I'm part of right now, and we were talking about kind of why we do what we do. What are my customers getting besides mortgage money? Okay, what when you realtors send me somebody, or when my previous customers refer somebody to me, or somebody calls me from Facebook or whatever, obviously they're getting my services, they're getting my knowledge, the mortgage industry, and they're getting my money, or not my personal money, but my company. But they're also getting what else I bring to the table. 25 years of experience. I got into business in 1998, so I've kind of seen it all. They're getting my personal attention to the dynamic of buying a home. Some of you know my story. You know what I went through, having owned a home when I lived in Tennessee, a home that I loved, lost it when the industry collapsed, literally was homeless for 6 years. If you don't know that story, that's a video of another time. But I got this house. I've had this house now for 4.5 years. And, obviously when you fight your way back from total loss, things mean a little more to you. And so I always think about that when I talk to my customers, when I'm dealing with them, somebody, especially a first time home buyer, and they're really struggling and trying. I always remember, man, I've been there. I so desperately wanted another place of my own after having lost everything. And it took a long time. So the other thing is I thought I would do is I want to tell you guys my very favorite mortgage stories, my favorite customer. And I had to narrow it down to two. I mean, I've been doing this as long as I have. There's a lot of them. And so when this video is up on my Facebook page, I'm going to tag some of my coworkers. I'd love to see you guys kind of make, not a challenge, because there's no challenge to this, but maybe think of doing this yourself. Because if nothing else, it sort of shows you, listen, we're all in what we do for money, right? If they didn't pay me, I wouldn't do this for nothing. But there's other jobs I could do. There's other jobs I could do with, at this point in time, less acid reflux. But I love what I do. I really do. I'm going to tell you two stories in all my years in the mortgage business, two of my favorites. One was a couple that worked, this is when I lived in Nashville, a couple that worked for Sony Music. And one of my friends who also worked there called me and says, hey, can you help these folks? Because they keep getting told that they can't buy a house. They've been renting the same apartment for 9 years. I can't fathom renting an apartment for 9 years. I mean, I guess if you're, maybe retired and it's just a place you like, but they were young, they were in their early 30s. And so I met with them, and it turns out that the wife had MS, and she'd also had a bad car accident. They had some pretty big medical bills that had been turned over to collections. They were years old. They weren't being pursued anymore, but they were showing up on their credit. Their credit was about a 600 score. And I said, look, everybody they talked to kept telling them, you got to pay this off. You got to pay this off. And they're like, we can't. We can't pay it off. And they're not chasing us for it because his wife was on disability. They're not chasing us for it because of her disability. They're not going to take it off our credit report. I said, well, look, you can go FHA because FHA doesn't care about medical collections, and you got to score high enough to qualify. And I said, let's put it together. So we met. I got all their information, their paperwork. Everything was very straightforward. I did, just for underwriting's sake, got her doctor, gave me a somewhat detailed history of her medical history so I could submit that. Now, remember, this is 14 years ago. So, back when they kind of wanted more of that stuff. And sure enough, I ran it through DU, got an approval, sent it to our underwriter, got it approved. Then they went looking for a home. They bought one. If my Tennessee friends are listening, they bought one up in Springfield. And I remember they paid $213,000 for the house. For whatever reason, I remember the number. And going to the closing, the wife especially sobbed, and thanked me and gave me a big hug. And we never thought we'd ever get a home, and they did. And the other story was really dear to me as well. It was a lady in Chattanooga that I never even met her face to face. Her name was Mary Ferguson, and this is back when you could tell the market. And I had an auto dialer that would send out a recorded message, and she responded back, and I called her, and her husband had a diabetic stroke, and he lost his job on the railroad, and they had all these medical bills. and he couldn't work anymore, Mr. John, and he couldn't work anymore, and they were saddled with medical bills, and she had filed a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Why she didn't do a Chapter 7, I have no idea, except I think she had a bad attorney. Because the attorney should have just told her, Mary, you guys are snowed under. You're not going to do, you just can't make it. He can't work anymore. Do a Chapter 7. They did a Chapter 13 at a 90% repayment. Like, this guy didn't fight for them at all. And she was at this point about 3 years into it. They still owed about 40% on the balance. And if you know anything about a chapter 13, if you pay it off early, you have to go back and pay the full amount. You can't, like, if your agreement was, I'm going to pay 50% of my debt over the next 5 years, and you pay it off in 4 years, you have to go back and pay the whole thing. You don't get that discount of 50%. So I got in touch with the trustee, and I said, listen, here's what we can do. This is killing her. She's almost all paid off. There was a balance of like $5,000. I said, so even at the 100%, it's only like $5,000. They've got a lot of equity in the property. We can get them out from under this. She needs a car desperately. And this poor woman was 67 years old and working about 55 hours a week at Memorial Hospital in Chattanooga on the housekeeping staff because her husband couldn't work anymore, and they had to make this payment every month to this Chapter 13. This trustee was the biggest jerk and would not give them permission to refi out of a Chapter 13. Would not. We could not, no matter what we did, could not make it happen. Her scores were too low. They were like a 560. I kept working with them, trying to get stuff. As things would get paid off, I would make sure they updated their credit report. I'll never forget the day I pulled her credit. It was 18 months later. 18 months. I pulled her credit, and it came back 603. And I said, Miss Mary, we can do this now. And I put the deal together. I emailed it to the trustee. The trustee signed off on it and said, yep, we can do it. It makes sense now. The rates are now, because you've got the score, the rates are down. You're reducing their monthly payments substantially enough that I think it's a good thing for them, blah, blah, blah. Never forget Miss Mary calling me, and I called her actually. I said, I got some good news. We got you approved. We're going to close this. As soon as the appraiser's done, we're looking at a month. So this will be the last month you're paying this Chapter 13. And there was nothing on the other end. And then I heard her kind of breathing, and she was crying, and she just thanked me so much. And I would get a phone call from Miss Mary Ferguson every 3 months or so. How you doing? And I never went to the closing. That's a sad thing. I never met her face to face because Chattanooga is like 4 hours from where I lived, and I didn't have a chance to get there. But she would call me. How are you doing? How's your daughter doing? I pray for you, and I love you. And I mean, and then Mr. John passed away. He was a lot older than her, and he passed away a few years later. And she called me, and Mr. John died. And I just fell in love with this lady. He was like a grandmom to me. And I always think about, the funny part about it was the loan was $66,000. I don't think I made $1,000 on that deal. And you know what? As far as I'm concerned, I made $1 million. Just to hear her voice, the sense of relief. She could go to part-time on her job now. They still needed a little bit of income. It was amazing. And I will just forever be grateful that there's times in my job, a lot of times in my job, that I'm not just helping somebody get a home. I'm really helping somebody. And so those of you I've tagged in this, realtors as well, tell me your favorite. Do a little video and tell me your favorite story from your job where it was more than a job. It was more than a closing. All right, see you.